if more people understood Bitcoin, it would already be worth like $50 million a coin. I feel like a lot of Bitcoiners or people who spend a ton of time like thinking about Bitcoin or wondering about Bitcoin are trapped in the Bitcoin snail pace. Makes for, having to find interesting things about it all the time. You're just sending messages about value. You're sending information back and forth about property and ownership. For me, there's a big difference between spending my Bitcoin, reallocating my Bitcoin. So like I wouldn't spend my Bitcoin on a house right now. That's not a trade I would make. But would I spend Bitcoin on a meal? Totally. We should feel that way now because it's going to do that again. So 7x from here over the next 5 years, let's say. So it's 700,000 by 2030. Personally, I think it's going to be a lot more than that. But like, even if it only did that, people would be very excited again.
Hi, Scott. How are you doing? Everything fine on your end?
Yeah, it's good. Good to be back. Thanks for having me, Robin.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's so cool because like in the beginning of the podcast, I thought it's really cool to have like always new guests on. But weirdly enough, I enjoy more and more just talking with, the people that I had already on, the second time, third time. I think with like 2-3 people I already had 4 times on, but I think it's only 2 or 3 people till now. And so it's really interesting because you can go deeper and the first podcast is basically just to get to know each other, just to see what are the topics. And I really enjoy having someone 2-3 times on. I didn't expect that, but like it's actually the third and the second and the third time is usually better than the first time in my experience.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's the same thing. It's like it takes a little while to build some chemistry and learn what people's interests are and explore their ideas, and all of those things are difficult to do on a first conversation. I think a lot of first conversations end up being like repetitive. It's yeah.
100%. It's like the Bitcoin story and all of that. But yeah, how have you been since I think we did the last recording about 6 or 7 months ago, something like that. How have you been in Bitcoin? What is kind of the most interesting topics that you've kind of seen in the current Bitcoin environment?
It's been busy. I'm co-CEO at Block Rewards. We are building what I believe is the world's best tool for paying people in Bitcoin. And startup environment. It's long hours. It's high stress. It's tons of fun. It's going well. We are just now in the transition from blockrewards.ca to blockrewards.com as we prepare for our entry into the US early next year, which is really exciting for us. And we have our eyes on Europe after that. So big plans. But other than that, I think the goings on of Bitcoin are kind of hard to ignore. It was paper Bitcoin summer. It was op return debate now, and today kind of everyone's worried that it's a bear market, and I feel like in some ways Bitcoin is becoming a little bit of a victim to people's like patience with how this process is going to unfold, and however long it's going to take for Bitcoin to do whatever people are excited about it doing, and its reluctance to be sped up. It's like this really interesting fundamental part about Bitcoin is that it can't be sped up. The average block is 10 minutes, but some blocks might take an hour, and no amount of extra mining can speed up a block, right? And so people who are involved in Bitcoin understand this, but for some reason, their understanding of that aspect of Bitcoin, the intrinsic unspeedability of Bitcoin, is lost on them when it comes to every other thing. Like Bitcoin is going to, however long it takes for Bitcoin to get to $1 million or $10 million, nothing's going to really speed that up either. And this is like a part of the inevitability of Bitcoin is also the having to wait for it. And I think it's a funny time in Bitcoin. I feel like a lot of Bitcoiners or people who spend a ton of time like thinking about Bitcoin or wondering about Bitcoin are trapped in the the Bitcoin snail pace. Makes for having to find interesting things about it all the time.
What is snail pace? What the heck?
Like a snail, the snail's pace, like
What is snail's pace?
Yeah.
Okay. So I was like thinking about a paste, like something like where what you put somewhere. Yeah, it's interesting because the this year has been almost sideways. So I've said in the most of my episodes in the past couple of months that we actually had over the last 12 months a good development with like 20, 30, 50% up, sometimes even like 80 or 90% up in the last 12 months. But now, slowly, we get to this point where the last 12 months just looking like 20% up or 10% up, depending on the day, depending on the time. I think today we are recording in November. So Bitcoin today is actually in the last 12 months, we're still 50% up. Like that's still unbelievable growth, like a 50% CAGR. If you have every 12 months, like a 50% CAGR, that would be unbelievable, great for Bitcoin. So I don't know. I just think people are extremely impatient
Yeah,
when it comes to price.
there's always a tendency to want to measure this thing on shorter and shorter time frames. Instead of even looking at year, you're looking at weeks, and it's insane. Like I think that to your point, and on top of that, the price is just one aspect of what's going on with Bitcoin. And then last year, there's been so many incredible things on top of that that are probably much more significant. Like, we're starting to see large scale institutional buyers, like really like the profile of who's buying Bitcoin is really changing. And there, you see like Harvard University, you see some big pensions moving into the space. I think that the evolution of some of the products that MicroStrategy is offering are going to trigger another wave of this evolution of buyers. As you see, kind of reinsurance companies, endowments. There are all kinds of like entities, financial entities that have a lot of money that actually still can't buy Bitcoin or Bitcoin ETFs, but will love these high yielding products. So, I think there's some really interesting things happening there. And also, the gold market and gold doing, what it's done. Gold added like a 2 trillion to its market cap in the span of like a week earlier this year. And so if gold starts to move like that, I think it's interesting to see what could happen, but it's positive for Bitcoin too, in my mind. If gold's worth $30 trillion and it's really just like a pet rock that also can be used as jewelry, then, unprintable global money, the Swiss bank account in anyone's pocket who wants it, this idea is worth way more than 30 trillion. So I think that gold doing what it's done should be a really exciting thing, at least for Bitcoiners who think that they're getting panicked about what the price might be doing over the last weeks or months.
It's interesting. The gold price has surprised me. Was this also something that you kind of was surprised with the 2025 movement of the gold price?
Yeah, I mean, I don't own any. I'm all in on Bitcoin. I think it's kind of like they say digital gold, but I think gold is really analog Bitcoin. It's the other way to think about it. And, I think that there's obviously, it's a signal that there's something structurally changing or breaking about the way money works, which Bitcoiners kind of already know, which for me is another reason why, it's like, how much confirmation do you need that Bitcoin is going to be valued by more people over the near term and the long term future, if like all of the signals sort of point to this global realization that the way money works is changing and the way we think about protecting capital is evolving. So yeah, I mean, it's probably a big warning sign. And to see gold, I would say my biggest thought is like to see gold move as violently as it did is pretty alarming, and is a sign. If I wasn't already holding as much Bitcoin as I possibly have the ability to, I would be trying to hold more right now.
It's really interesting because the debasement trade is like one term that is kind of trending a little bit right now. And this is interesting because this means that the mainstream, the people in TradFi are kind of waking up to the fact that the money is broken. So up until now, they always looked at like, hey, see, my stock portfolio did so well, measured in US dollar. And it's like, yeah, everything does great measured in US dollar. Even used cars can go up in value value in US dollars because, yeah, guess what? The car could hold the price of the car of the purchasing power. The car can hold the purchasing power better than the money that you're using. So everything can go up as Bitcoin did go up, as all the things go up. And so I think right now there's a little bit of a shift happening where people are questioning, yeah, why is everything going up? Like, why is everything actually getting more expensive and is performing so good? Maybe it's not going up. Maybe the thing that we are measuring in it, maybe that thing is actually going down. I kind of see that more and more in the mainstream, and I'm wondering if it's just because I'm in the Bitcoin bubble and I see everything with the Bitcoin eyes, but I have this weird feeling that the mainstream is kind of waking up to the real problem of money. They don't waking up to the solution with Bitcoin, but at least they see more and more the problem with the debasement of the currency.
Yeah, I think you're probably right about both. Unfortunately, I do think Bitcoiners, we are in a bubble. And, because honestly, if more people understood Bitcoin, it would already be worth like $50 million a coin. And there's not that much that needs to happen in between. But I do agree with you. I think that you are starting to see more mainstream media coverage around the problem of money printing, and it's being acknowledged even by some politicians. I think in Europe over the last couple of weeks, opposition party in Germany is talking about a Bitcoin reserve. There was some talk of it in France as well. So it is happening, but yeah, we'll see.
What do you actually think? Because you mentioned the strategy and what they're kind of doing in unlocking capital. What do you think is actually the impact that treasury companies in general have on Bitcoin, on the impact they're having on this asset?
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of personally, I think with treasury companies, and I could totally end up being massively wrong about this, I think the companies themselves need to have an actual business. Like I don't really see there being a ton of long-term value in a company whose total business proposition is owning Bitcoin and, trying to create ingenious ways of issuing shares around that. And with the exception of MicroStrategy. Because what MicroStrategy has done really is cornered the market on the amount of money that they could possibly bring in as they, like this yielding product is really clever. And they've just launched a version of it that will be in Europe. And then I imagine they'll have one that will launch in Japan, and so what they're doing is really taking Bitcoin out of the equation and offering the market what it's really seeking, which is a real rate of return that is higher than currency debasement. And so you really actually do just about everywhere need to earn more than 10% to stay ahead of, currency debasement being 7, 8, 9, 10, depending where you live. And also, a 10% yield, if the market gets to a place where they believe that Saylor can reasonably pay this out over time, people will flock to it because, right now they're doing the same thing, but they're getting, 4 or 5% on government bonds or, junk bonds that don't pay 10%. I mean, yeah, you'd have a hard time getting that in real estate. And so I think that they have done something, it depends on Bitcoin's ability to continue to perform, but I think that they can really drive that performance. They're going after some market that's between 30 trillion and 300 trillion. If they're able to get 1% of that market, then they'll be able to move the Bitcoin price themselves like a 1 or 2 or 3x. So I think that, there's kind of Saylor, and then there's everybody else. I'm like, so we look at a company like Metaplanet to me, and there's a temporary sort of jurisdictional arbitrage happening in Japan, but if you can get the Saylor product that's yielding 10.5% in Japan, I think that these other treasury companies are going to have a hard time competing. There's been some starting to sell, and I think you're going to see a lot of consolidation, and it wouldn't surprise me if, I know they've said that they're not going to do this, but if a treasury company gets below a 1 MNAV, you can basically buy their Bitcoin for cheaper than it would be to go out and buy the Bitcoin on the open market. So I think that a lot of these treasury companies that don't have real offerings beyond owning Bitcoin are going to actually end up being consolidated and bought by MicroStrategy. This is my hot take. And so, I think in the end, yeah, it's kind of MicroStrategy and everybody else. Beyond that, I think ultimately every company will end up being a treasury company because it just makes sense. Bitcoin is like the most important corporate asset a company should be thinking about owning. And so I think that we'll stop calling them treasury companies at some point, and we'll just call them companies because that's just a smart thing that everybody should be doing.
I 100% agree, and then I have a hard time believing, as you also said, that companies that have only the goal of acquiring more Bitcoin will sustain themselves long term. Now, if they can be like a bank or they have some offerings or some services around that, using the Bitcoin as the basis, maybe, but they also have to prove themselves then to customers and manage the client relationships and all of that. So I just have a very hard time believing that any company not offering any services, just sitting on a big stack, will survive a very long time. I mean, depending on how big the stack is, you can survive a long time. I think Sailor stack is now very big already, and so you can you can make a lot with that amount of Bitcoin, and you can come by for a few years on that easily. And he actually quoted it, and it's actually interesting because there's like those pumps from those locked capital markets towards Bitcoin, and then it's the question of like how many of those pipes you need, and I don't think we need more than like one or two maybe. And so strategy has cornered the market, as you said, and maybe there's a place for a second competitor. I don't know. I also don't really have any ambitions to do anything in that space, but it's just interesting for me that there are now companies, their sole purpose is to acquiring as much Bitcoin as possible. It's almost like, hey, I want to acquire a lot of gold. Do you want to buy my company? It's like, because I want to buy gold. It does not make sense for me. It's just like a short-term thing that happening because there's locked capital that cannot access real Bitcoin, I guess.
Yeah, and I think unfortunately there was a lot of, scam kind of pump and dumps that happened with the stocks. And this is like another, like getting back to the early part of our conversation, people wanting to like really rush Bitcoin. And I think that, this is not an old thing or not a new thing where people want to, wrap Bitcoin in something else to try and amplify the returns that they might be able to get, or they want to produce like a cash flow, like, they wish that Bitcoin would generate some kind of a yield. These are all sort of like variations of old things that didn't work before and they still don't work now. And they're just sort of like, it's this ongoing painful lesson for people who, unfortunately, with Bitcoin, it is like winning the lottery in slow motion. And we live in this dopamine depleted, instant gratification society where 50% a year isn't enough, which is an unfortunate reality. It's totally insane, but it is also an unfortunate reality of how things are. And I think that's partly just like a symptom of how hard things are getting, that, for people to feel optimistic about it, or maybe even just like feel alive, they need to get like this, 1000x feeling, or they feel like they're losing.
100%. Do you think that it might actually be a distraction because people are so now focused on those gains in the treasury companies and Suitcoin Summer? I think you mentioned that before also, that people forget that Bitcoin is actually money that you can earn and spend and do all those actually useful things.
Oh, 100% I do. Yeah, 100% I do. And I think that, this is also probably partly by design, and that Bitcoin is being in some ways reduced to a new audience of Bitcoiners into like only number go up. And, the ETFs, I think, contribute to that because they give people exposure to the price of Bitcoin without them having to actually interact with Bitcoin or have never made a Bitcoin transaction. So I think that's like a cohort of investors in Bitcoin population that's probably expanded rapidly right now. And it's like it's a continual evolution, I think, of the people who are consuming the content and who are interested in it. My feeling is that the money part is, obviously it's the most important thing, but it will be more relevant for people when they start to experience real pain with their own money. And, like we had that in Canada in 2020, 2021, when the government started freezing bank accounts. But that even is kind of like a distant memory for a lot of people now. And, point of sale terminals at merchants work very well here. So like there isn't really that pain with money. But if you, were to canvas like somebody from Lebanon or, Argentina, places where the money is absolutely doesn't work properly, they probably would think about it very differently than the average kind of like Western investor that's just trying to still compound their portfolio faster than they feel like, inflation's eroding it.
And there is so many people now like, oh, like it's not going up, not going up. I just want to remind people, I just looked it up. We are a 7x the last 5 years. Like a we started 5 years ago with 14,000 US dollars. Like this is, we are moving now this in a week sometimes. like we almost had daily candles that were as big as Bitcoin was just 5 years ago. And 5 years is nothing. I think 5 years is the starting point where you should look at price developments. Anything under 5 years is just pure speculation. And you should actually look at 10 years. I mean, with Bitcoin, it's complicated because Bitcoin is just around for 16 years. So you cannot look beyond that. So I get that point, but at least 5 years you should give yourself to, to look at something, and everything underneath is like, yeah, it's entertainment, maybe, speculation, but it's not really doing anything for you if you look at those numbers.
I mean, also like, I think it's, interesting to think about how the adoption of technology works on 5-year cycles. 5 years for the evolution of a technology is an eternity, right? And, put Bitcoin aside, like smartphones really are the same age-ish as Bitcoin. And that technology, it changes so much. 17 years ago, everyone was using flip phones. And within 5 years, like every 5 years, that technology changes so much. And then the one that I like to talk about often is like the adoption of email. And when I was just starting my career, my schooling career in university, that was like the kind of the start of mainstream email. And that I started university in 1998, and that was really the first time I got an email address. And at that time, like nobody had the habit of using email. Like I used to never check your email inbox. You miss emails all the time because it just wasn't a normal thing. And 5 years later, when I entered into the workforce, you actually couldn't run a business without email. You couldn't have a job without email. Like that was only 5 years. And so, I often think about the comparison between Bitcoin and email because I was alive for that transition, but it's an information technology for sending messages. And Bitcoin is that too, right? You're just sending messages about value. You're sending information back and forth about property and ownership. And so if we were at 1998 in email today in Bitcoin terms, then in another 5 years, like, everybody could be using it. It's totally reasonable. So I think that it's the propensity for people in the West, I think, especially because of like, our shortening attention spans, TikTok and Instagram, we've had our ability to take a deep breath and zoom out basically beaten out of us by technology and media. And, because of that, we have almost no ability to just enjoy the ride. Like you said, 7x in 5 years, that's insane. Like if anybody was owning anything else, they would be so pumped about that, and everybody else would be lining up to buy it. And we should feel that way now because it's going to do that again. Like, so 7x from here over the next 5 years, let's say, so it's 700,000 by 2030. Personally, I think it's going to be a lot more than that. But like, even if it only did that, people would be very excited again. I mean, I think this is, it takes time.
100%. And it's, I also look at 2030. 2030 is an interesting one because like it's also the 5 years, as you mentioned, from 2025. I mean, now we are very fast approaching already 2026, but we're still in 2025. So 2025, now 5 years later would be 2030. And you mentioned those 5 years. And it's interesting because there's this concept from I forgot his name. This gradually then suddenly from Parker Lewis, like this concept, and I had him already 2 times on the podcast, and it was really interesting. Where he talks about there's a point in history where all of a sudden it changes really quickly within like 1-2 years, and everyone adopts it. And it's the major change for Bitcoin would probably be a hyperinflation, especially if we see hyperinflation in the G3 nations, so like euro, dollar, or yen. If one of those three is like hyperinflating, man, people will flock because now when a currency is hyperinflating, they're fleeing to one of those three currencies. If someone in the Turkey, like they're going to the euro, maybe in Argentina, they're going to the US dollar. And so what if those three currencies are no longer a safe haven for those other currencies? All of a sudden people are like, oh, what else is there? What else is there to buy? And at that point, hopefully Bitcoin is already stable enough, developed enough to actually be ready for that many people, because we also have to be ready as a network to be onboarding so many people. And that's why I say, like, everyone that is building in Bitcoin, you will be very busy the next 10 years. Like, so you will be having a lot of work, and you don't even know where to put all the work that you will be having. And so that's why I always say, like, there's no competition in between Bitcoin companies. There might be right now, but if we enter the era that I think we are entering, we need every single person that is currently working in Bitcoin, and probably like 10 times as many companies and people and employees and all of that, because there's a huge influx of new work for all of us, and we are not ready for it, I feel like.
Yeah, I can agree more. It's all hands on deck. Everything you said, I think we are, and the possibility that one of those currencies or all of them hyperinflates, I think is pretty real. I just finished over the weekend Adam Livingston's book, The Great Harvest, which I would recommend for people who are interested. It's kind of a book about the intersection between AI and Bitcoin, and sort of this idea that AI really is, and I believe this is happening. We'll see about how fast it happens, but I mean, observably, the rate at which AI is improving is like astonishing. It's like every few months you can see things that weren't possible. Like 2 years ago, AI couldn't even make a video with fingers in it, and now people can basically create a Hollywood quality movie in their basement. The argument with Great Harvest is sort of basically that AI ultimately, it creates like infinity everything, infinity compute, infinity productivity. It's something that will challenge the very meaning of money itself. And I think that, like, the idea that infinity everything in a world with infinity money would just be a completely nonsensical place to live, and that we're going to have to very soon transition to a finite measurement system to measure a complete transition of the way everything else works. It's like there was an article I saw this morning about a company in Germany that has developed an autonomous restaurant that can make 120 meals an hour without any people, and there's zero waste, and it can make whatever you want. And so these things are, changes and innovations are starting to happen so quickly and be so significant and disruptive that I think it's going to put a lot of stress and pressure on an already cracking system, on how money already doesn't make sense. And so, forget about having to deal with, a change in productivity and computation like we're living through right now.
It's super interesting to think about the AI impact. Do you think AI might even accelerate like what Bitcoin is doing?
Absolutely. I think that, in my opinion, AI will understand Bitcoin before people do. And I think that it will just determine that Bitcoin is the most rational means for transacting. Like, AI is going to, you can debate about how soon it's going to happen, but AI is absolutely going to be autonomously moving value online. That's just like, that is for sure. And when it does, it's going to be able to need to use money that's permissionless. it won't be able to interact with bank accounts in the same way human beings do, because the banks, I think, are going to really struggle with financial actors that aren't human beings, or they're going to have to figure out how to exist in that system. And so to me, Lightning is going to be the currency that is selected by AI, because money will have to move as fast as computation and information, and 40 million transactions a second. Like that's how we get there. So I think that this is something that will just start happening. And I think that AI kind of merging with Bitcoin creates, will start moving, will start a demand to stream money in a way that the legacy financial system just won't be able to keep up with. Yeah, it's possible that stable coins could be something that's being created to try and like slow this inevitability down, but I don't think it'll work.
Yeah, stable coins are for me an interesting intersective technology that might help bridge the gap between normal digital currencies like just a euro or a dollar just in a bank account towards Bitcoin. And I see stable coins as kind of the bridge where people go like, okay, like, so Bitcoin is just basically a stable coin gold kind of a thing. And so like people always have to like some kind of explanation where they see like, okay, it's digital, and okay, there's all those sound properties. As you said, I also see gold as kind of the analog Bitcoin because the Bitcoin has the superior properties. But I feel like stablecoins actually could bridge the gap between fiat and Bitcoin to a certain extent. I'm not sure about that, but I do think there's always bridging technologies that kind of are like hybrids between something. I don't know, maybe I don't know if Blu-ray is a good example, but I always bring it up. It's like it made it a little bit better, but then Netflix came along and made it 1,000 times better. And so there's those hybrid bridging technologies in between that I think stablecoins is just something that we have to deal with the next couple of years, but it will not be there in 100 years.
Yeah, I agree. I have a hard time seeing it too, because I think stablecoins are even easier to print. Like I think that like it's easy to see how the expansion of the money supply in a stablecoin world gets even worse, like the problem of the expansion of the money supply. And two, I think that it's this idea that's really strange for people because we've grown up in a fiat world that, Bitcoin is commodity money. It's money where the underlying thing of value has been recombined with the money itself. And that's how it used to be when money was precious metal. And then we abstracted that by using a paper representation of the thing. Bitcoin really recombines the desirable thing and the money, which ostensibly negates the need to have, a further abstraction of it. Obviously, there's some technicalities because of, tax rules and stuff like this. But I think that like, the ultimately truly disruptive innovation, it can't be held back. And the thing about combining, recombining the underlying thing of value with money, with the form of money, is that it re-empowers the individual person by giving them this form of money that is immune to debasement and enables them to actually just save. And this is like a critical, fundamental thing, right? And this is a world-changing technology that lets people, store the fruits of their labors and protect private property digitally in a way that is incredibly difficult to confiscate, either through, it can't be printed, it can't be confiscated through printing, and it's really hard to, physically take it from someone. So stablecoins can't offer any of that. And I think that as those, the daily problems that come along with, like, things we were talking about earlier, the general growing awareness of the connection between the problem of money devaluing and life getting harder ultimately is a road that leads everybody to Bitcoin. And, It's just a matter of when.
I want to tell you about something very special to me. It's called Microseed. If you hold your Bitcoin in self-custody, and you should, you know how critical it is to secure your seed phrase. You should not have them on paper. You should not have them on anything else than titanium. With Microseed, you can engrave your 12 or 24 word seed phrase, the entire seed phrase, onto a 1-inch small washer. Yes, just one washer. All 24 words on that one washer. You can hide that thing everywhere. And even better, you don't need to buy a new kit every time you have to get a new wallet. You can make unlimited backups because Microseed is not selling the washer. Microseed is selling the device that stamps the washer. So you get the full kit with the device, with the washers, with the hammer, with everything you need to get started today. And you can make with that unlimited amount of backups. Go now to microseed.io. Again, that's microseed.io to get your last backup tool you ever need. The most important thing for your Bitcoin journey is not buying Bitcoin, but it's how to keep them. And yes, you have maybe the right tools, but how do you actually go ahead and stick it all together so it's the most secure for you personally? Self-custody is a deeply personalized journey, and the Bitcoin way is helping you exactly finding that correct setup for you personally. They're also helping you with securing your own cybersecurity. And if you want to go one step above all that, you can even get a consultation for a Plan B residency. Go to thebitcoinway.com/Robin and you will get a 30-minute free consultation. I finally and officially mine Bitcoin. This is not just something to stack more Satoshis, but it's most importantly also to support the network. Individual miners are the ones that keep the Bitcoin network decentralized. And by the way, you get KYC free Bitcoin. That's why I use Simple Mining. I get an actual proper Bitcoin miner. They set it up for me. They repair it if it breaks down. And most importantly, they let me choose the pool and even connect my own full node. I'm completely sovereign and I'm completely in control, and I can sign up with Ocean, no account needed. I just give them a Bitcoin address and then there's mining going on. No KYC, nothing. So if you're ready to mine Bitcoin, go to simplemining.io, tell them you come from Robin, and let's mine Bitcoin together. I love that because it kind of highlights a lot of the things that I'm also thinking about, where you don't really have a choice in this. And this is also what I say to big critics of Bitcoin. In the end of the day, you have the chance of being part or to see the biggest revolution in finance ever. And you can now say, oh, it's bad for that, or like it has that flaw, or any of those. And maybe you're right. I don't think so. But what if you're wrong? What if you have a small reason why you don't like Bitcoin and you never give your chance to look deeper? So I think Bitcoin is such a big idea has such big implications that you owe it to yourself to at least look into it, to study it a little bit, because the opportunity cost of missing such a big revolution while you are alive in that area is just so big. And so the opportunity cost of just looking into that 10, 20 hours and even deciding what you want to do with that is very low. But the opportunity cost of saying, hey, I don't want to look into that, I don't want to look deeper, I don't have an open mind towards that asset, is huge. You might miss the biggest thing ever happening in your lifetime. And people will ask you what you have done in that time frame. And it's absurd to not at least study it. Like, you don't have to be a permeable like me and just like go all in and like earn it and spend it and all of that. You should, but you don't have to. At least understand why it's happening and what's going on. And I think more and more people actually wake up also in TradFi to see like they were haters before and now they like slowly get into them. There's like the finance guy that I see there's now a little bit into Bitcoin. There's like a few people that I saw being very against Bitcoin the last 5 years and now like slowly turning, which is a really interesting kind of effect that I've kind of witnessed. I don't know if you've seen the same thing.
Yeah, I was excited to see finance guys, coming around, and this is getting back to this idea that I think the ETFs have roadblocked some people in their progression of understanding what Bitcoin is, because you can really just stop or stall out at a position of understanding that Bitcoin is a good performing asset, which it is. And then, without interacting with Bitcoin, the technology, that's a requirement to move beyond that into a deeper understanding of how Bitcoin works and why it's a good performing asset. That's the thing, right? Bitcoin is a good performing asset because of the properties that it has, that is causing people to be like you and I, right? Where we're holding on to it for dear life. And we know that the properties of this technology are highly likely to make it increasingly in demand, and it's essentially solving the most important problem that affects every single person, company, and government on the planet. So it is the most desirable product ever. It is the biggest idea hatched that any of us has been alive to see. It is all those things, but you can also not understand any of that and just know that it's going to go up if you have it in your portfolio. So it's kind of one of these it's a funny time for Bitcoin.
100%. And we were talking about like hold on for the laugh, because I think we both are very big on actually earning and spending Bitcoin, which was very hard for me to get over that hump of spending Bitcoin. It was about like, I would say now, I don't know, like 8 months, like maybe even a year ago, something like that, where I got over the hump of actually spending Bitcoin, because I started earning Bitcoin for the first time in my life, probably like 1.5 years ago. And when I started actually earning directly someone that wanted to pay in Bitcoin and I accepted Bitcoin, so Bitcoin wallet from Bitcoin, from Bitcoin wallet to Bitcoin wallet and from Bitcoiner to Bitcoiner, this made me realize, oh, I get now Bitcoin and I still have those fiat bills. And so I have to make a critical decision. Do I want to just keep stacking my Bitcoin and use it as a collateral and just like spend my fiat and get more fiat based on the collateral, or do I just spend my Bitcoin? I decided for spending Bitcoin because I don't want fiat debt and I want to use Bitcoin as money as it's intended to be. But it was so hard for me, like the thing that I had to overcome okay, for 5 years straight, I said to myself, hodl, don't sell, hodl, don't sell, hodl, don't sell. And all of a sudden, I'm selling. Like, I know spending is not selling, but like it essentially has the same effect that you part with your Bitcoin. Even if you sell it for dollars and then spend the dollars, or like you spend the Bitcoin directly, like it has the same effect in my opinion, even though I like spending more than selling. And so this was really freaking hard for me to overcome that, even though I already was earning Bitcoin. And actually, if you think about it, if you earn directly in Bitcoin, you want to spend directly in Bitcoin because you're saving on fees. You're saving on exchange fees. You're saving on like all those fees that are involved with that. And so if you can just directly earn and directly spend in Bitcoin, that's the best thing you can possibly have, because you live on a Bitcoin standard. You don't need anything in between, and you just like from Bitcoiner to Bitcoiner. But it was very hard. So, what is your kind of experience with like people spending Bitcoin? And also, was this also hard for you to like actually go ahead and say that I part with my Bitcoin and I don't hodl them?
I mean, I think that Bitcoin forces a reevaluation of your consumerism. And so I think for me, there's a big difference between spending my Bitcoin and reallocating my Bitcoin. So like I wouldn't spend my Bitcoin on a house right now. That's not a trade I would make. But would I spend Bitcoin on a meal? Totally. It's like and so that's where I think, earning Bitcoin is really helpful in making a psychological shift, because if you're buying something like it's a collectible, It's like a piece of art, a baseball card. Like you're buying it because you think it's going to be more valuable in the future. You're not going to want to cut the corner off of that piece of art to try and pay for your lunch. And this is where I think it. But if you're earning Bitcoin, you have it continuously coming in. Then you're not thinking about it like a collectible. You're thinking about it like money, which is what it is. It's just money that doesn't steal from you, which is really cool. And so the key creating that inflow of Bitcoin, I think makes it a lot easier. And so it doesn't surprise me to hear you say, because I think I was the same way. But when you don't have Bitcoin coming in, you're really reluctant to see it go out. And this is because every person who's into Bitcoin does, I think, realistically have a running mental tally. Unless you are one of the people who is early enough that you have so much Bitcoin that it doesn't matter. For everybody else, you probably know exactly how much Bitcoin you have. And if you were thinking about making a bigger purchase like a house, it wouldn't surprise me if you were thinking about how much of your stack that was going to take, or like at what point you're comfortable with what percentage of your stack. I think this is the way people start to think about bigger trades, which does make sense to me too. Because honestly, there's no point to die at 80 years old with 100 Bitcoin and have had none of the stuff that you want and done none of the things that you wanted to do along the way, right? Like ultimately, money is just a tool that we use to transform our time and energy into something that we can store so that we can convert it back into time and energy so that we can consume it and use it the way that we want to, and so we have the flexibility and autonomy, choice in life, right? So I think that this is the whole point of money. And so it should ultimately be for everyone, in my opinion, about spending your Bitcoin and probably spending all of it, or like, whatever you don't plan on leaving to your descendants. But I do understand the reluctance.
It's hard. What do you think will come first? Is it the people wanting to spend Bitcoin, or the merchants starting to say like, hey, like I want your Bitcoin, and then like accepting Bitcoin as kind of a new payment method?
I think merchants, and I think that there's you're already seeing the big merchant payment providers starting to look at Bitcoin or integrate Bitcoin, Stripe and PayPal, and I can never keep them straight, because there's Gresham's law and then there's Thayer's law, and one of them works the opposite way. And I think it's Thayer's law that states that kind of like you want to receive the good money rather than you want to get the bad money out of circulation rather than keep the good money keep the good money for yourself. I could have completely messed that up. Yeah, I think that it starts more with merchants starting to understand that it's beneficial for them to, because this is already true. It's just there's just not a ton of people that are looking to spend Bitcoin. But I think if you hold out your shingle as a business saying that you'll accept it, you do get Bitcoiners almost immediately. And Bitcoiners, regardless of where they're living in a city, will go out of their way to support those businesses or travel. I think Bitcoiners do like to spend Bitcoin, and if it's coffee shops or whatever, they end up gravitating towards those business owners and becoming interested in the community that comes along with it.
I just looked it up. Gresham's law is the principle that bad money drives good money in currency markets. What was the other law? Like I think I never heard about that. Fears. How do you write Fears law?
Thier.
I-E-R. Did I write it correct?
I might have the spelling wrong. Maybe it's
how about it's their law? That's definitely something completely else. Oh gosh,
that's something else.
But yeah, Gresham's law. I was aware of like this. The bad money drives out the good money in currency markets because people want to spend the bad money first, and so I think that's also the interesting thing where if you have Bitcoin and US dollars, like of course spend first the US dollars before you touch your Bitcoin. But I went to a standard where I have only Bitcoin. So if I spend now $2,000 on my US dollar bank account, I'm $2,000 in minus, and so I have to wait till I get new fiat, or I have to convert some Bitcoin into there, because I make fiat only a medium of exchange and make Bitcoin my money. So Bitcoin is also my medium of exchange whenever possible, but sometimes I have to use the dirty fiat to make an exchange. And so in that sense, then I make the exchange where I sell Bitcoin and put it on my bank account, because I have to cover the losses I made with not having fiat. And so for me, it's very normal that like bad money drives a good money. It's just that I don't want to have the bad money around. And this is what I get. I always get that argument in the comments, and I never understand it. People tell me, oh, but why would you spend your Bitcoin? I'd rather spend my dollars. And I'm like, I don't have dollars. I don't want to hold. If you want to spend your dollars, you have to hold the dollars. And I don't want to hold the dollars. That's the key. The key difference is, like, if you only have Bitcoin, that's the only thing you can. Of course, you can go in depth and collateralize and all of that, but I'm not a big fan of that. Outside of that, if you spend fiat, this means you have to hold fiat, even if for a just short amount of time. And I rather just don't hold the fiat.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's a funny thing. I think it's that evolution of understanding Bitcoin as money. You know, it takes yeah, because people who are observing the price of groceries go up, they're probably still not equating that with the value of the dollar going down. You know, because in their mind, still crazy. The dollar is the only money, or the euro, whatever. Yeah.
100%, which is crazy for me that people complain about inflation and then say, "Oh yeah, it's Russia." Like, what the hell? Like, where does this come from? what has Russia to do with our inflation? Like, like Putin. Okay, yeah, of course. Like, war is an inflation force in some sense, but it's not the reason why we have inflation in the first place. It's just like a consequence of it, maybe.
Yeah,
really
cool. Yeah, whatever people see on TV.
Whatever people see on TV. It's also interesting. I don't know how it's in America, or what you're kind of seeing in mainstream media, but I do listen to them here and there. And every time inflation comes up, they're saying like, oh yeah, like the main driver for inflation are the energy prices. And I'm like, okay, the inflation is the inflation driver now. Like, the inflation in the energy market is now the driver for inflation in all the other markets. Like, okay, where does the inflation of the energy prices come from then? If, like, are those just greedy corporations, I guess, that they just want to drive prices up? But yeah, it's a whole nother topic. I could go on like for, I don't know. Do you still consume mainstream media? Like, I get always frustrated when I listen to them.
No, not at all. I don't own a TV. So I don't have any. Yeah, for me, I think that, like, I started going down this Bitcoin journey in 2020, and I sort of realized first that the money was fake, and then I had a bigger opinion that, markets are fake, politics are fake too. I think just an unfortunate trade-off for me in my Bitcoin journey has been I've become just less. I don't think that any of these things, they're also tied to the money lie. It's elections are just such a good example. People love to feel like if their team wins, things will be different in a way that they think is better. But no team is ever going to vote for fixing the money problem. And so as a result, it doesn't matter what political party you're rooting for, whatever solutions they bring to the table if they win are going to make everyone poorer. And that's just fact. And so for me, there really isn't any point to like pay attention to politics anymore, understanding that, because that's actually true everywhere. Like, maybe a month ago in the U.S., Rand Paul, he's a Republican congressman, put a vote forward for balancing the US federal budget in 5 years, and it was voted down 2-1 by both sides, by both parties. Like nobody wants to address the elephant in the room, and they'll talk about everything else. And so, I think it's all really just distractions, and your life isn't any better, I think, knowing about any of this stuff or not. Start saving in Bitcoin, get rid of your dollars, and go outside, go enjoy nature, go skiing, go hang out with your friends. Like, I think, the reason, so yeah, I don't pay attention to anything mainstream anymore at all.
I couldn't find it now in the amount of time, but there's a great chart that shows basically how much money each presidency were printing in the USA, and it's just it's unfortunate that I cannot find it right now. I might just put it on the screen somehow later on if I find it, but it basically showed that I think the first 36 presidents or 38 presidents, something like that, they printed together 1 trillion. and then the next president in the next 4 years printed like 1.7 trillion. And then the next one printed like 8 trillion. And then it went up and up and up and up. And it was never, I actually found it. I want to show this because I don't want to say just random stuff. And so this is the chart that was talking about it. It's such a great illustration. So we have now the first 39 presidents printed the first 1 trillion US dollar. You have to think about that. Like the first 39 presidents printed together 1 trillion US dollar. Then Reagan printed in 8 years 1.8 trillion. Then we had Bush in 4 years. So Bush almost printed as much money as Reagan Reagan did in 8 years and Bush did in 4 years. Then Clinton did 1.7 trillion in 8 years. Bush Jr. is 6 trillion in 8 years. So he did already like 5x what Reagan did. Then Obama really stepped up and said like 8.3 trillion in 8 years. And Trump stepped up even more. Trump printed in 4 years the same amount that Obama printed in 8 years. And so this just shows it's not a who you're voting for. It's just like every freaking president prints a lot of money and usually more than the previous one did.
Yeah, I mean, they have to print forever or the system will collapse. So, they're going to print forever and it doesn't matter who's in charge.
100%. It's really interesting too. And that's why like it doesn't matter really. I mean, there's some like nuances to that. So like who's in charge like has some influence, I guess, on your life. But in the great grand sphere, like if you think about 100 years back, probably doesn't matter that much. But interesting enough, do you still consume some sort of news? Or do you stay up to date with things, or like how do you consume it? Like, do you just go on Twitter, or like do you have some podcasts or like things that you're just like, okay, I'll just tune into that and see what's kind of going on through that lens?
Yeah, I mean, a lot less than I used to. I was like, I was a history student, political science, post-grad, spent 15 years in traditional financial markets. Like, I'm really used to paying a ton of attention to global events. And I think even now, it's gotten to a place with AI where it's difficult to know the accuracy of what you're even seeing in the news. And so I struggle with, I think that one of the things that's very true for people in the West is that we've been told a very big lie. And that lie is that we are not subjects to propaganda. And it's like people in the West after World War II, I think, grew up thinking that propaganda was something that happened in other parts of the world, in the bad parts of the world, like in Soviet Russia, in communist China. Those are the places where the media is run by the government and they're programming you to think a certain way. But it's very true that in the EU and in North America, we are incredibly propagandized, and the government has like a lot to do with what you see on TV and what you read in the newspapers. And it's not news, it's a slanted story that's designed to create a mass consensus on certain stuff. Like, this is how politics works, right? In Canada, the largest media organization is the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, which is like 80% funded by the government. And Canadian people don't understand that this is not a media outlet. This is an arm of the government telling people what to think. And this BBC, it's true all over, right? But for some reason, Western people think that propaganda is something that happens somewhere else. But yeah, so I think that as little of that stuff as you can consume for your own mental health, the better. I don't think it's going to there may be some, if aliens land tomorrow, yeah, you would probably need to know about that because it might impact how many types of food are available in your local grocery store. But short of that, like, most of the things that go on really don't impact you. And if you are, saving your financial energy in indestructible protocol with immortal money, you're gonna and you're thinking about things on longer than a 5-year time frame, there's probably not that many things that you really need to be that aware of, honestly.
There is this concept of, if it's big enough of a news, it will reach me anyways. Like, it will reach me through some group chat or something that I'm paying attention, or like someone will bring it up to me if it really is an important news outside of my personal sphere that I need to know about. And so I go on and off news, like consuming news. Like, I had a period of time where I didn't consume anything, and people telling me, "Oh, what do you think about that?" And I was like, "Oh, what's happening there?" I have no clue. Like there's a lot of things like that. And now I'm a period where I like actually pay attention. But it's actually, like, when I look at it, it doesn't bring me any value. It's just entertainment at the end of the day, because if I consume it or not, it wouldn't change how I act right now. You might want to pay attention to the tax system that you're in, and maybe you can improve something, but you don't need to pay attention to the news there. You just need a good tax guy, because you yourself anyways have a little chance of like actually knowing all the things in the tax world. Otherwise, outside of you being actually a tax professional, I don't know. There's no argument for me to actually care about the news outside of entertainment, which is a fair argument. Like, if it entertains you, like, go ahead and watch it.
Yeah, and I think like the algorithms partly just train people to, be upset about certain things. Like it's content that's algorithms themselves get better at getting people's attention. They're just trying to get you focused on stuff, get you excited about stuff, get you angry about stuff. And, I think if you're consuming any of that kind of content, you are running the risk that the algorithm is better at feeding you stuff you're going to be interested in than you are at discerning whether or not you should be interested in that stuff, right? It's like, I think people really haven't, it's difficult to take stock of how that technology has evolved, and the apps really are getting progressively more addictive, and that's on purpose. Like, those apps are in the business of getting more of your mind share from, they're competing with other apps, right? And so they win by being addictive. And how do they be addictive? It's by showing you more stuff that makes you want to look at even more stuff, right? And so you're fighting an uphill battle if you're going to try to be your own moderator of consuming content, in that way, and thinking that you're going to be able to, safely navigate that technology and do it in a way that creates like an objective, like, if you're siding with one particular side of an issue, you're going to get fed more content that reinforces the thing that's causing you to go to that side of the issue. And it's going to further make you think that you're right about that thing, right? Like it's not trying to do that. It's just trying to get you to spend more time looking at the app. But I think, it's like, this is just a dangerous time that we live in. And it's like, the best thing you can do is spend more time watching podcasts like this and learning about Bitcoin, and forget about the, like you said, things that aren't really going to change your life anyways.
Yeah, in general, the longer form the content is, usually the better it is. So like I would rather listen to an 8-hour audiobook than be 2 hours on TikTok. I would rather, if you want to watch, like, I'd rather watch a 2-hour great movie than be like an hour on Instagram. And so like I think long form quality content in general is always better for your brain, for your all of those things than any of this. But you said in the beginning something very, very important. If you give up the control of what you see, you are basically, I don't want to say a slave, but like you are basically susceptible to whatever the algorithm feeds you. And you can get down a very dangerous road, because I have people that say like, oh, like everything is so XYZ currently. And I'm like, yeah, because that's what you watch on Twitter. And that's what Twitter feeds you all the time. If you wanna see a different world in your phone, look at your girlfriend's or wife's Twitter feed or Instagram feed and compare it with your own. It's a very different feed. Like there's the same video doesn't come in in those two feeds at all. At least that's my experience. And then maybe go ahead and watch a feed of, like a 50-year-old, like colleague of yours, and maybe one that just like starts out with like 15 years old. Go ahead and make that experiment. How every feed of every single person is very personalized, very individualized to make that person watch as long as humanly possible and get that attention of that person as long as humanly possible. It is very dangerous for you to go down the path. Now, you can control it to a certain extent. I make those experiments. I have an YouTube account on and make YouTube shorts there, and I trained the algorithm to just feed me stand-up comedy, and it's so cool. Like I go in there and I just see like one stand-up comedy after another, and it's so funny because I trained it to what I want to see. So I every time I saw something funny, I was like sharing it, I was liking it, I was watching it 2-3 times, and you will be surprised how quickly you get that stuff fed to you all the time. So you can use it nicely. I don't encourage that at all, because most likely you will be just like and so again, with stand-up comedy, I rather watch a 1 hour, 1.5 hour great skit of a stand-up comedian than watch like 1.5 hours on YouTube on like stand-up comedy, like one after another. I truly think the long form content is better for your brain than the short form content in many different ways. Granted, I'm not a brain science, but I have a weird feeling that I'm right.
Totally. I think we're being conditioned to be dumber, and I think that's probably on purpose. There's going back to the very start of the conversation. It's no wonder why people have a hard time thinking about Bitcoin in terms of 5 years. It's because we're being trained to watch something for 60 seconds and get bored. Like that's the reality of how people interact with entertainment now. And so it's like a war on attention span, where we're fighting this like civilization level battle for conscious attention, and Bitcoin is like a symptom. I was talking about this a few weeks ago on Twitter. Like it's like that, if we had maybe if Bitcoin had appeared 10 years earlier when the world was a lot slower, Bitcoin adoption might have actually been much faster, just because people had a lot more ability to just pay attention and wait. and right now, because of the way things are, it's incredibly hard.
100%. One last thing I want to get in there before we have the end routines of the podcast. You mentioned it in the beginning, and it was fascinating for me to watch that op return debate unfold over the summer. It almost seems like it's getting little less emotional. It gets a little less like instrumental. Like less people seem to care about it these days, and there's like more rational and less like emotional arguments made now, which I think is a very interesting thing. But I'm curious how you saw what this debate means for Bitcoin. Like what does this mean for Bitcoin if the kind of of the debate that is kind of happening? Is there any learnings that you had for where we are in the Bitcoin journey?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I will say, there are a lot of people in the Bitcoin space who are a lot more technical than me. My opinion on it generally is we need to be really careful about changing Bitcoin above all other things. And if there is a change that has to be made at this point in Bitcoin's life, it shouldn't feel to users like it's being rammed down anyone's throat. So that's my biggest kind of like takeaway is if the op return limit did need to be raised, then what we should be talking about, in my opinion, is the process by which these changes are enacted. And when there was an initial, you could measure the implementation of knots as like, a protest. That should have been enough, in my opinion, to like delay or defer that particular change to 31 or 32 or never. So I think that it has really highlighted an important conversation about the mechanism by which decisions with Bitcoin are made. I think that it's true that the core developers, the composition of core developers has changed, and it's going to be something that continues to change. And I think it's important that there's a conversation about like what are we trying to accomplish by by changing Bitcoin. And so yeah, it was interesting that the core 30 went out, and you didn't immediately see like entire blocks being consumed by single transactions. Doesn't mean it can't happen. But like we're talking about a monetary protocol of money that's been designed to run through 2140, and just because something didn't immediately break it doesn't mean. And we just have to be so careful right now. So that's been mine. Actually, on our podcast on the Block Reward this week, the guest is Tomer Strolight. Tomer is a really, somebody who's been in Bitcoin a long time and really understands, I would say, all aspects of this conversation very well. And the episode that we did was really a conversation about how are decisions about the evolution of Bitcoin being made. And so I think if you're interested in that topic, I would point to that episode. Tomer just really did an incredible job discussing kind of like some really delicate nuances of important issues.
I love that. And it's interesting because I think if they would have just raised it a little bit, nobody would have cared if it was just like 2x raised or something like that. But they set the standard over 1,000x higher. I mean, they almost like eliminated they removed the limit almost. And then it's like, yeah, probably people will care, and probably people will scream and like, why do you do that? And then
it's like Michael Dunmore said to me, it's like, could you imagine if everyone said like, room temperature now is 27 degrees. And that's the default, that everyone has to heat their restaurants and offices, and everything has to be 27 degrees. And if you want to set it lower, you can, but we're not forcing anyone to do that. But the default on every thermos is going to be 27 degrees. And it's like, that doesn't make any sense. Why? Yeah.
It actually is a good comparison. Interesting. we have one question to ask each and every one of my returning guests. I think I've asked you also last time when you were on the podcast also, but maybe there's something new coming in there. What have you learned outside of Bitcoin since your last appearance on this podcast?
Ooh, I don't know if you did ask me that question. What have I learned outside of Bitcoin since I last appeared on the podcast? I don't know if I actually have a good answer for that. I think I was on about 6 months ago. I'm trying to think of like if I had a new hobby or honestly, I spend still most of my time really thinking about Bitcoin. Like I was, talking about how I've kind of called out all of my my other like entertainment interests. Last weekend, I finished a great book called The Bitcoin Enlightenment by Ricardo Salinas. Ricardo Salinas is the third wealthiest person in Mexico and really brilliant Bitcoiner. And so I'm going to cop out and I'm going to give you a Bitcoin answer to a non-Bitcoin question. I highly recommend The Bitcoin Enlightenment by Ricardo Salinas.
I like that. It's also interesting for me to see because I asked that every single Bitcoiner, and I asked them what can we learn from you outside of Bitcoin, or what have you learned outside of Bitcoin since your last appearance, like depending on if you're a new guest or not. And this is usually the first question in the podcast where the guest takes like a few seconds to like think about it. It's like, actually, like what outside of Bitcoin is there, which just is kind of like I think it just shows that we are really obsessed with Bitcoin, and it kind of shows how big Bitcoin is, because if it wouldn't be big, we wouldn't just really care about it. And so our whole lives are kind of really focused on that one aspect of it. But it is definitely funny how the great Bitcoin speakers, and then there's like this one question, it's like, oh, I don't know. It's like, and I actually was asked that recently on another podcast where I was invited, and I also was like, oh, like wait, everything is kind of Bitcoin related in my life. So I wouldn't need to cheat on that question. And like, even if you're like, you say like, I mean, I could say about podcasting, like I launched Microseed, the company, I can say things, but they're all related to Bitcoin in some sort of sense. So it's a really interesting one. I love asking that question because it's usually the first small pause in the podcast.
Yeah, I'm going to have to definitely expand my interest before I come on for a fourth show.
Read a non-Bitcoin book.
Yeah.
Really cool. Thank you so much. We have an end routine in the podcast, as you know, where the previous guest is asking a question for the next guest without knowing who the next guest actually is. The previous guest asked you the question, when would you reallocate some Bitcoin to another asset, not spending? So spending doesn't really count.
I guess it would depend on what asset. If we were talking about a significant asset, my personal price for parting with a significant amount of Bitcoin is a lot higher than we have now, like well over $1 million US. I think that people who, life has a lot to do with when it makes sense for people to part with Bitcoin. And for me in my life right now, I think that parting with a significant amount of Bitcoin is kind of like playing Russian roulette with hyperinflation, with property rights being altered in a way that are really difficult for people to imagine right now. So a much higher price would be the answer.
I like that, because it's also like when I think about when would I be willing to change Bitcoin into maybe a home where I like reside and like build a family and all of that, I'm like, we're nowhere near that price. Not even close. And so it's an interesting one. Yeah. Thank you so much, Scott, for being on and for being such a great guest on the podcast. Before I let you go, where can people find you, ask you questions, and reach out to you?
For sure. And thanks again for having me on. It was tons of fun. I'm on X. The handle is Lantern Bitcoin. I'm on LinkedIn, and you can find our company at blockrewards.ca.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being on, Scott. And also thank you so much for everyone that is watching and listening for joining us today. As always, I'll be back tomorrow with another episode. Bye-bye. This content is for educational and entertainment purposes only and does not constitute financial advice.